This lecture is going to focus on how to write an essay. You can use this lecture to walk you through step by step the things that you will need to include in the essay that you are writing. This this lecture is a little bit longer than most of the other lectures, so I encourage you to pause it when you need to take a break, and then come back to it maybe at a later time, so that you can continue working. The first thing that you need to start working on for this essay is writing your introduction. An essay's introduction is usually a single paragraph that introduces the reader to the essay's subject matter. For this assignment, you will be creating an introduction paragraph. We'll talk about what is kind of included in that introduction in the next few slides. So the role of an introduction is the following. First, it needs to grab the reader's attention. It needs to introduce the reader to the essay's topic, and then announce the essay's thesis. So those are, that's kind of the role of the introduction. So in order to do this, there are three parts. You're going to have an attention grabber, some transitional sentences, and then you're going to have your thesis statement. And we will go through each one of these and see what they look like. I want to emphasize that each part of the essay's introduction has an important role. So your thesis statement is as important as your attention grabber, and that's also just as important as the transitional sentences that you include leading up to your thesis statement. Your attention grabber is usually going to be the first sentence or the first few sentences in the essay's introduction. The grabber sentence or sentences are meant to grab the reader's attention by saying something interesting that makes the reader want to read the essay. An essay about being bitten by a shark might have the following grabber sentence. As I felt the shark's razor teeth cut through my arm's flesh and bone, I had one thought as I lost consciousness. I was going to die. So that is an example of a sentence that would really get a reader interested in wanting to read more of the paper. That is the purpose of your attention grabber. I should be able to read the first line of your essay, and it should make me want to read more. Here are some different types of attention grabbers. You can start by asking a question. For example, have you ever wondered why, or what if blank happened to you? Or do you know the real story behind blank? Asking a question is a great way to start your essay if you're having trouble thinking of anything else. You can tell a story. A short story or a short anecdote is a great way to start and to catch someone's attention. Here are just some examples of possible or some stories, just to show you an example. But your story, whatever story you would tell in your introduction, would be related to whatever you're going to be talking about throughout the rest of your essay. You could have an attention grabber where you find an interesting statistic or even an interesting fact and start that way. Or you can use a thoughtful quotation. Again, you don't have to do each one of these as your attention grabber. You should most likely pick one and use that to start your essay. So after you've had the attention grabber sentence, you want to include some transitional sentences. These are meant to transition the reader from the grabber sentence to the essay's thesis statement. Transitional sentences are optional sometimes because essays that demonstrate a clear link between the grabber sentences and the thesis statement may not need a transition. For this assignment, you are going to need some transitional sentences to help lead your reader to your thesis statement. And we already talked about thesis statements, but just to remind you, a thesis statement is the final part of the essay's introduction. I've provided two sample introductions for you, both using a different type of attention grabber. But you can see I have it broke down here. You can see the attention grabber, the transition sentences, and then the thesis statement. So I'm going to actually read these aloud, just so you can get a feel. How wonderful it is that nobody need wait a single moment before starting to improve the world. These words were spoken by one of the most resilient young girls in history, Anne Frank. Anne Frank, was a young Jewish girl who lived during the Holocaust. She and her family spent a significant amount of time in hiding from Nazi soldiers. In 1947, the Diary of Anne Frank was published, which described her time in hiding. Anne Frank is a resilient woman that I consider a hero because of her strength, humor, and influence. Now let's break this down a little bit. You see, the attention grabber that I chose to use was a quote. And this is a quote actually from Anne Frank herself. So a good way to kind of grab the audience. Now, you also see the transition sentences. Had I left those out, my introduction would read, how wonderful it is that nobody need wait a single moment before starting to improve the world. Anne Frank is a resilient woman that I consider a hero because. That, for this assignment, is too short for an introduction, and it also doesn't give any background knowledge. If the reader didn't know who Anne Frank was, they still wouldn't know unless they read the transition sentences. So the transition sentences here give some background so that the reader understands kind of, where we're going with this introduction. The next sample introduction, I chose to use a different type of attention grabber. I chose to use more of a story to kind of grab the reader in. So again, I'll read this aloud too. Imagine being locked in the confines of a small house that you share with several other people. When you are allowed to move about freely, you're forced to tiptoe from one spot to another. Each day you feel could potentially be the day that you are caught and sent to a concentration camp. If this story makes you feel any discomfort, imagine what life was like for Anne Frank and her family. Anne Frank was a young Jewish girl who lived during the Holocaust. She and her family spent a significant amount of time in hiding from Nazi soldiers. In 1947, the Diary of Anne Frank was published, which described her time in hiding. Anne Frank is a resilient woman that I consider a hero because of her strength, humor, and influence. You can see in this sample introduction that the only thing that was changed was my attention grabber. My transition sentences and thesis statement are the same. So the main purpose of this was to get you seeing how you can use different attention grabbers to get the attention of your audience. We are going to move into talking about body paragraphs. So if you want to stop here and do some work on your introduction and your thesis statement, you're more than welcome to, and then come back when you're ready to start thinking about your body paragraphs. But let's talk a little bit about writing good body paragraphs. For this assignment, you're only required to write one body paragraph, but for other classes, you will definitely be required to write more than just one. So good body paragraphs have at least 5 sentences. For this essay, you're going to be needing 10 sentences for your body, but you will have a topic sentence, a bridge, an example, some elaboration and explanation, and a concluding sentence. So your topic sentence explains what the paragraph is about. It also supports your thesis. So if we looked back to my thesis where I said that Anne Frank is a hero because of her strength, the first topic sentence I would have would be one way that Anne Frank shows strength is. So you see that it supports my thesis, and it would explain what the rest of the paragraph was going to be about. The next thing you need is a bridge, and this bridge idea, again, can be looked at similar to those transition statements that we just talked about. But your bridge provides any kind of relevant background information needed to preface the paragraph's supporting example. So, is there anything specific the audience needs to know about Anne Frank being strong? If so, I need to add some of that information in. This is what's going to connect your topic sentence to the actual example that you are explaining. So far we have our topic sentence. We have our bridge sentence. The next thing is the actual example. So you want a concrete detail that supports the statement made in the topic sentence. This can take various forms. You can use a direct quote from something that you read or something paraphrased. You could use a statistic or a fact. If you are using a direct quote, you need to make sure you introduce it and state who said that quote. But for this essay, you're more just going to be kind of explaining your thesis statement. So your example is going to be more of an explanation. Then we move on to the elaborate stage. So this explains how the example supports your thesis statement. So if my example of Anne Frank being strong is the ability for her to stay quiet for days at a time, then I'm going to elaborate on that. So I might give an example from the book where it says that. I might explain how it takes a lot of strength to stay quiet for days at a time. This part is going to be more than one sentence, or at least it can be more than one sentence. And then the last thing that you're going to need in your body paragraph is a concluding sentence. So this draws a conclusion based on the previous topic. And then this also transitions the reader into the next topic or paragraph. Here are some things that you want to avoid when you're writing a body paragraph. Don't use words such as things and stuff. This is too vague. Really challenge yourself to find good, strong vocabulary to use in this writing. Avoid writing I think or I believe or in my opinion. This is already understood because the paper is in your voice. You're the one writing this paper. Avoid using first person unless you're writing a personal narrative. So I don't want to see in your body paragraphs the word I, me, us, or we. And then never use slang. Excuse me. Do not write how you talk. You must take on a more sophisticated tone when writing. So I don't want to see any LOLs or OMGs in your writing. I want to see you actually practicing good academic writing with good word choice. Here is a sample body paragraph. And I didn't do two samples of this because basically the information in my body paragraph is going to stay the same. Any way you look at it, Anne Frank is a hero. This is my topic sentence right here. Now I'm going into my bridge. Though she did not fight in any wars or win any special prizes, the amount of strength that it takes to remain positive while in hiding is commendable. So now I'm going into my example. She was there for her family. She remained in good spirits, and she continued to write in her diary. And now I'm going to elaborate. It takes so much strength to continue to do these things, even while knowing you could get caught at any moment. In her diary, there is also evidence of humor. There were many occasions when Anne Frank discussed jokes that were made or highlighted, funny situations in her family. Having a sense of humor during the Holocaust was a challenge. She still found a way to incorporate her sense of humor despite her circumstances. These are two of the reasons why Anne Frank continues to be an influence for people today. She is an example of a strong woman who was able to maintain some kind of normalcy while in hiding. So this is a about 10 sentences, which is what your body paragraph, and it follows the exact format that we just talked about. The topic sentence, the bridge, the example, the elaboration, and the concluding sentence. So after you have finished your introduction and your body paragraph, you're going to move on to your conclusion. If you want to pause now and spend some time working on your body paragraph, this would be a good time to do so. And then you can just come back when you're ready to start working on your conclusion. So what is a conclusion? The conclusion is the final paragraph of an essay. It has three main purposes. One, it signals the end of the essay. It is going to summarize your subtopics and paraphrase your thesis. And then it's going to leave the reader with your final thoughts on the topic. So these three things I am looking for in your conclusions. Here are some ideas that you can use to get started with writing your conclusion. Include a brief summary of the paper's main points. Ask a provocative question. Use another quotation. Evoke a vivid image or tell another strong story that's going to, capture the reader. Call for some sort of action. End with a warning. Compare whatever situation you're talking about to other situations, or suggest results or consequences. Again, you don't have to do each one of these in your conclusion. These are just some ideas of some things you can do to get you started. I've also included a sample conclusion. I want to strive to be like Anne Frank. Not only did she demonstrate resilience, she has become a hero because of her strength, sense of humor, and influence. When people read the Diary of Anne Frank, they are reminded of the hope that she brought to each day. Many people have compared Anne Frank's living situation to what people experienced during quarantine. I would argue that it is much different. Anne Frank faced imminent death if discovered compared to the risk we experienced during quarantine. But one thing we can learn from Anne Frank is hope. No matter the situation, we should always be hopeful. So you see I have those three parts. This is like signaling the end of the essay. I restate my thesis statement in different words and kind of sum up what was talked about in the body paragraph. And then I kind of end with a call to action to remain hopeful. So this concludes the lecture on writing your entire essay. There will be some additional resources in Blackboard for you to look at. I am also including the full essay that I sampled here, so the introduction, the body, and the conclusion. You'll be able to look at that as a whole document. Again, email me with any questions or concerns.